and protocols developed over centuries of interaction. Imagine walking down a busy street when suddenly everyone around you stops moving. Time itself seems frozen as a figure in brilliant white approaches you with eyes like burning stars. You blink, and everything returns to normal, except for the golden feather in your palm that wasn't there before. For thousands of years, humans have reported such encounters with beings from beyond our world, messengers from the divine realm we call angels. But what if these encounters never stopped? What if angels still walk among us today, intervening in human affairs, delivering messages from heaven and shaping the course of history? Welcome to our channel, where we explore forbidden questions and hidden truths of history, religion, and the unknown. If you love journeys that challenge what you thought you knew, make sure to join us, because today's story may change the way you see everything. Let us take you back to a time when angels freely visited humanity, when divine messengers appeared to shepherds, prophets, and ordinary people with world-changing revelations. But then something changed. The visits stopped. Heaven grew silent. Or did it? Chapter 1. The Last Recorded Encounter. On a cold night in Bethlehem over 2,000 years ago, shepherds watched their flocks under a star-filled sky. Suddenly, the darkness exploded with light as an angel appeared before them, announcing the birth of the promised Messiah. This moment represents the last widely accepted angelic visitation recorded in biblical history. Before this night, angels appeared regularly throughout human history. They visited Abraham with news of Isaac's coming birth. They wrestled with Jacob at Peniel. Moses spoke with them on Mount Sinai. The angel Gabriel announced to Mary that she would bear the Son of God. These encounters weren't rare exceptions, but normal parts of how God communicated with his people. Ancient civilizations around the world shared similar beliefs about divine messengers. Egyptian texts describe winged beings delivering messages from the gods. Mesopotamian tablets record encounters with divine intermediaries. Greek and Roman cultures spoke of divine messengers bridging the gap between heaven and earth. Every major civilization expected and experienced contact with beings from beyond the physical realm. Archaeological evidence supports these beliefs. Ancient art depicts winged figures interacting with humans. Temple inscriptions describe protocols for receiving divine visitors. Religious ceremonies were designed to welcome heavenly messengers. Humanity lived with the constant expectation that angels might appear at any moment with crucial information from the divine realm. But after the apostolic age, something changed. The clear, undeniable angelic encounters that marked biblical times became increasingly rare. Religious scholars debate whether God withdrew his messengers or whether humanity lost the ability to perceive them. The silence that followed would shape human history in ways we're still discovering today. What if that silence was never meant to be permanent? What if the age of angelic visitation was supposed to continue, transforming human civilization in ways we can barely imagine? Chapter 2. When Heaven's Gates Closed. Early church fathers like Augustine and Chrysostom wrote extensively about the disappearance of miraculous signs and angelic visitations. They believed the age of direct divine intervention ended with the completion of biblical revelation. This doctrine, known as cessationism, taught that supernatural gifts and angelic encounters were temporary tools for establishing the early church. But other voices disagreed. Medieval mystics like Hildegard of Bingen claimed continued angelic contact. Joan of Arc insisted angels guided her military campaigns. Teresa of Avila described detailed conversations with heavenly beings. These accounts were often dismissed by church authorities, who preferred controlled, institutional religion over unpredictable divine encounters. The institutional church had good reason to discourage claims of angelic visitation. Direct divine communication threatened established religious hierarchy. If anyone could receive messages from heaven, what need was there for priests, bishops, or papal authority? The church developed elaborate systems to test and usually reject claims of supernatural encounters. During the Age of Enlightenment, scientific rationalism further distanced humanity from supernatural beliefs. Angels were relegated to folklore, children's stories, and artistic symbolism. The modern world embraced a materialistic worldview that left little room for divine messengers or supernatural intervention in daily life. Yet throughout history, reports of angelic encounters never completely disappeared. They were marginalized, explained away, or dismissed as hallucinations, but they persisted. People from every culture and time period continued to report meetings with beings of light who delivered messages, provided protection, or offered guidance during crucial moments. The question remains, did angels actually withdraw from human affairs? Or did humanity simply lose the ability to perceive and acknowledge their continued presence? The implications of either answer would reshape everything we think we know about divine interaction with our world. Chapter 3. The moment everything changes. Picture a pivotal moment in history where the divine council makes a different decision. Instead of withdrawing angelic messengers after the apostolic age, heaven decides to maintain active intervention in human affairs. The reasons could be numerous: humanity's continued need for guidance, the complexity of advancing civilization, or perhaps God's desire for ongoing relationship rather than distant faith. This decision would fundamentally alter the concept of faith itself. Traditional Christianity teaches that faith requires belief without sight, trusting in God despite uncertainty and doubt. But with continuous angelic presence, faith becomes knowledge. The invisible becomes visible. Divine reality becomes as obvious as gravity or sunlight. The butterfly effect of this single change would ripple through every aspect of human development. Religious institutions would face constant divine oversight. Political leaders would govern under heavenly scrutiny. Scientific advancement would accelerate through access to divine knowledge. Social justice would be enforced by supernatural intervention. But continuous divine presence would also raise profound questions about free will. If angels constantly intervene to prevent evil, guide decisions, and correct mistakes, do humans truly have the freedom to choose their own paths? Would humanity develop the same creativity, resilience, and moral character that comes from struggling through challenges without divine assistance? The balance between divine guidance and human autonomy would become the central tension of human civilization. Angels would need to develop sophisticated protocols for when to intervene and when to allow human freedom, creating a complex dance between heavenly wisdom and earthly choice. This moment of decision, to maintain rather than withdraw angelic presence, would transform not just religious history, but the entire trajectory of human civilization in ways both wonderful and terrifying. Chapter 4. First Contact Protocol. How would angels adapt their communication methods as human civilization advanced? In biblical times, they appeared in dreams, spoke audibly, and manifested visually to shepherds and prophets. But as humanity developed written language, printing presses, telegraph systems, radio, television, and eventually the internet, divine messengers would need to evolve their approach. Language barriers would present immediate challenges. An angel appearing to ancient Hebrew speakers could communicate in their native tongue, but how would heavenly messengers navigate the thousands of languages that developed across the globe? Would they develop universal translation abilities, speak through interpreters, or find entirely new methods of communication that transcend verbal language? Cultural translation would prove even more complex than linguistic translation. Divine messages that made perfect sense in ancient Middle Eastern culture might be completely misunderstood in medieval Europe, Renaissance Italy, or modern Japan. Angels would need to become master anthropologists, understanding not just what humans say, but what they mean within their cultural contexts. The ethics of divine intervention would require careful consideration. Should angels prevent natural disasters, stop wars, cure diseases, or guide scientific discoveries? Where would they draw the line between helpful guidance and interference with human development? These decisions would require wisdom beyond human understanding. Modern surveillance technology would present unique challenges. How would angels maintain their mission while navigating satellite monitoring, facial recognition systems, and digital tracking? Would they adapt to use technology themselves, appearing through digital devices? Or would they develop new methods of manifestation that work within technological societies? The protocol for distinguishing true angels from deceptive entities would become crucial. As human civilization advanced, so would the sophistication of those who might impersonate divine messengers for personal gain or malicious purposes. Authentication methods would need to evolve alongside human technology and understanding. Chapter 5. The Ripple Begins. The immediate consequences of angels maintaining visible presence among humans would create unprecedented chaos in established spiritual hierarchies. Religious institutions built on faith, tradition, and interpretation would suddenly face direct divine competition. When angels appear in churches contradicting sermons, visiting mosques during prayers, or manifesting in temples worldwide, established religious authority would crumble overnight. Mass religious conversions would sweep across the globe as people witness undeniable proof of divine reality. But paradoxically, increased skepticism would also emerge. Human nature tends to doubt what seems too good to be true. Many would assume angelic appearances were elaborate hoaxes, psychological manipulation, or advanced technology designed to deceive the masses. The scientific community would face an existential crisis. Materialistic worldviews that exclude supernatural phenomena would be challenged by reproducible angelic encounters. Some scientists would embrace the evidence and attempt to study divine beings through empirical methods. Others would deny the evidence entirely, creating deep divisions within academic institutions. Governments worldwide would scramble to develop policies for supernatural encounters. Military leaders would want to weaponize angelic power or recruit heavenly allies. Intelligence agencies would attempt to spy on divine communications. Legal systems would struggle to incorporate testimony from supernatural witnesses into court proceedings. The emergence of angel chasers would create a spiritual tourism industry unlike anything in human history. People would travel thousands of miles, hoping for divine encounters. Religious theme parks would promise guaranteed angelic experiences. Fraudulent spiritual guides would exploit desperate seekers with fake supernatural displays. Distinguishing real angelic encounters from increasingly sophisticated fakes would become a crucial skill. As genuine divine visitations became common knowledge, elaborate deceptions would emerge to exploit human fascination with the supernatural. the wheat would need to be separated from the chaff on a global scale. Chapter 6: The Crusades That Never Happened. Imagine Pope Urban II calling for the First Crusade in 1095, only to have angels appear simultaneously in Jerusalem, Constantinople, and Rome, declaring that God desires peace between Christians and Muslims rather than holy war. With divine messengers directly contradicting papal authority, the Crusades would never begin. Angels intervening in religious conflicts would prevent humanity's darkest chapters of violence committed in God's name. When heavenly beings appear to both Christian and Muslim armies, declaring that the Almighty abhors violence between His children, soldiers would lay down their weapons rather than risk divine judgment. The Spanish Inquisition would be impossible with angelic oversight. As Torquemada and his inquisitors prepared to torture suspected heretics, angels would appear in the chambers, revealing the innocence of the accused and the corruption of the accusers. Divine justice would replace human judgment, making religious persecution impossible to maintain. Salem witch trials would end before they began, as actual supernatural beings appear to differentiate between genuine spiritual encounters and mass hysteria. Angels would protect innocent women accused of witchcraft while exposing the real spiritual darkness behind false accusations and community fear. Missionary work would transform from conversion efforts to confirmation experiences. Instead of convincing indigenous peoples to abandon their beliefs, missionaries would discover angels appearing to native populations, revealing which elements of their traditions align with divine truth and which practices need modification. Religious wars throughout European history would be prevented as angels appear on battlefields, stopping Catholic and Protestant armies from destroying each other over theological differences. Divine messengers would clarify disputed doctrines in real time, preventing centuries of bloodshed over interpretations of Scripture. The transformation of religious conflict into religious cooperation would accelerate human civilization by centuries, allowing energy spent on warfare to be redirected toward exploration, science, art, and social development. Chapter 7: Scientific Revolution Accelerated. Angels sharing heavenly insights about natural laws would fast-track human scientific advancement by centuries. During the medieval plague years, divine messengers would reveal germ theory, teaching humans about invisible microorganisms centuries before microscopes could detect them. Millions of lives would be saved through divinely inspired hygiene practices and early medical knowledge. Astronomical discoveries would come through angelic revelation rather than dangerous challenges to church authority. When Galileo faced the Inquisition for supporting heliocentrism, angels would appear before the papal court, confirming that Earth indeed orbits the Sun. The conflict between science and religion would be resolved through direct divine testimony rather than centuries of painful struggle. Medical miracles would be accompanied by explanations of natural healing processes. Angels wouldn't just cure diseases, but would teach human physicians the principles behind divine healing. Understanding of anatomy, physiology, and medicine would advance rapidly through heavenly instruction, creating a golden age of health and longevity. The ethical dilemmas of divine knowledge versus human achievement would challenge civilization's progress. Would humans become lazy and dependent if angels provided scientific answers rather than allowing the struggle of discovery? The balance between divine assistance and human effort would need careful management to preserve the joy and growth that comes from learning. Environmental protection would begin millennia earlier as angels reveal the interconnectedness of natural systems. Divine messengers would warn about deforestation, pollution, and species extinction long before humans could understand these consequences independently. Sustainable technology would develop alongside industrial advancement rather than as a desperate response to environmental crisis. Scientific method would evolve to incorporate supernatural variables. Researchers would need new protocols for studying divine phenomena while maintaining empirical rigor. Universities would offer courses in angelology alongside biology and physics, creating hybrid disciplines that bridge material and spiritual understanding. Chapter 8: Reformation Redirected. Martin Luther's famous 95 Theses would never need to be written. As church corruption reached its peak in the early 16th century, angels would appear in St. Peter's Basilica during the sale of indulgences, publicly exposing the spiritual fraud being perpetrated on faithful Christians. Divine messengers would declare that forgiveness cannot be purchased and salvation is not for sale. Protestant Reformation would be prevented through direct divine correction rather than theological debate. Angels appearing to Pope Leo X would demand immediate church reform, elimination of corrupt practices, and return to biblical principles. The unity of Christendom would be maintained through supernatural intervention rather than being shattered by human rebellion against abuse. Papal authority would face its greatest challenge not from human reformers, but from heavenly messengers contradicting unbiblical teachings and practices. The doctrine of papal infallibility would crumble when angels publicly correct papal pronouncements that conflict with divine truth. Church hierarchy would be restructured according to heavenly protocol rather than human ambition. The translation of Scripture into common languages would be encouraged by angels appearing to Bible translators, ensuring accuracy and preventing political interference with divine revelation. William Tyndale would complete his English translation under angelic protection, making God's word accessible to ordinary people without persecution or martyrdom. Religious unity maintained through continuous divine oversight would create a very different Christianity. Instead of thousands of denominations arguing over interpretations, angelic clarification would resolve theological disputes quickly and definitively. The energy spent on doctrinal arguments could be redirected toward practical ministry and social justice. However, this unity might come at the cost of theological development. Human wrestling with difficult spiritual questions often leads to deeper understanding and stronger faith. With angels providing easy answers, would Christianity develop the same depth and richness that comes from centuries of careful study and debate? Chapter 9: Colonial Expansion Transformed. Christopher Columbus would receive divine navigation assistance, but angels would also appear to Native American leaders, warning them of incoming diseases and providing knowledge for protection. The devastating epidemics that wiped out indigenous populations would be prevented through angelic medical intervention and advance warning. Spanish conquistadors would find their plans for exploitation blocked by divine intervention. As Hernán Cortés prepared to destroy Aztec civilization, angels would appear to both Spanish and indigenous leaders, facilitating cultural exchange rather than conquest. Gold and resources would be shared through divine negotiation rather than stolen through violence and deception. The African slave trade would be impossible with angelic protection of vulnerable populations. Divine messengers would appear on slave ships, breaking chains and guiding captives to safety. European traders would find their human cargo mysteriously liberated, making slavery economically impossible and morally unbearable under constant divine scrutiny. Missionary work would become true cultural exchange as angels help missionaries understand indigenous spiritual traditions, separating cultural practices from spiritual truths. Native peoples would receive Christianity as an addition to their understanding rather than a replacement for their entire worldview. Global trade would develop through divine guidance toward mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Angels would prevent unfair trade agreements, ensure equitable resource distribution, and guide economic development that benefits all parties involved, rather than enriching only colonial powers. The prevention of genocidal colonial policies would preserve indigenous knowledge and cultures that were lost in our timeline. Advanced understanding of agriculture, medicine, and astronomy from native traditions would combine with European technology under angelic guidance, creating unprecedented scientific and cultural advancement. Environmental protection would begin immediately as angels reveal the long-term consequences of colonial resource extraction, guiding sustainable development practices that preserve ecosystems for future generations. Chapter 10. Industrial Revolution Guided. The Industrial Revolution would unfold under divine environmental oversight. As James Watt perfected the steam engine, angels would simultaneously reveal clean energy alternatives, preventing the coal-burning pollution that darkens skies over industrial cities. Steam power would develop alongside solar, wind, and other sustainable technologies through heavenly instruction. Factory working conditions would be transformed by angelic intervention. Divine messengers would appear in textile mills, preventing child labor and ensuring worker safety. The brutal exploitation that marked early industrialization would be impossible under constant supernatural scrutiny and protection of the vulnerable. Capitalism would develop with built-in ethical constraints. Angels would prevent the worst excesses of early industrial capitalism, ensuring that wealth creation serves human flourishing rather than pure profit maximization. Economic systems would be guided by divine principles of justice and fairness rather than unchecked competition. Environmental protection would be mandatory from the beginning of industrial development. Angels would reveal the connection between factory emissions and environmental damage, forcing immediate adoption of clean technologies. The environmental crisis that plagues our modern world would be prevented through early divine intervention and guidance. Urban planning would be influenced by heavenly wisdom about human community needs. Industrial cities would be designed with divine input about optimal living conditions, preventing the overcrowded slums and public health crises that characterized rapid industrialization in our timeline. Scientific research would be accelerated through access to divine knowledge about natural laws and processes. The gap between scientific discovery and practical application would shrink dramatically as angels guide inventors toward technologies that serve human needs while protecting the environment. However, this divine guidance would raise questions about human achievement and creativity. Would the Industrial Revolution produce the same innovations and entrepreneurial spirit if angels provided the answers, rather than allowing humans to struggle through problems and discoveries independently? Chapter 11. The Book of Enoch Vindicated. The controversial Book of Enoch, excluded from most biblical canons, describes detailed encounters between the patriarch Enoch and various classes of angels. With continuous angelic presence, these ancient texts would gain tremendous credibility as heavenly beings confirm the accuracy of Enochian descriptions of celestial hierarchies and divine operations. Enoch's account of the Watchers, angels who descended to earth and shared forbidden knowledge with humanity before the flood, would take on new significance. If angels continued visiting humans throughout history, the boundary between permitted and forbidden divine revelation would need constant clarification and oversight. The detailed angelic hierarchies described in Enochian literature would become practical organizational charts for ongoing divine-human interaction. Seraphim, cherubim, archangels, and other celestial beings would have defined roles in administering continuous supernatural intervention in human affairs. The Catholic Church's historical suppression of Enochian literature would be challenged by ongoing angelic confirmation of these texts' accuracy. Debates about biblical canonization would be resolved through direct divine testimony about which books contain authentic revelation and which are human fabrications. Advanced technology described in ancient texts as angelic knowledge would become reality. Enoch's descriptions of flying vehicles, advanced metallurgy, and astronomical instruments would be recognized as genuine divine revelation rather than primitive mythology or later interpolations. The implications for biblical interpretation would be staggering. If Enoch's angelic encounters were accurate, what other mythological elements of Scripture describe literal supernatural realities? The line between symbolic and historical biblical interpretation would require complete re-evaluation under continuous angelic presence. Questions about forbidden knowledge would become practically urgent. If angels shared advanced technology and scientific understanding with antediluvian humanity, leading to corruption and divine judgment, how would ongoing angelic instruction avoid repeating those same catastrophic mistakes? Chapter 12: Islamic and Christian Unity. The angel Gabriel holds central importance in both Christianity and Islam. In Christian tradition, Gabriel announced Jesus' birth to Mary. In Islamic belief, Jibril delivered the Quran to Muhammad. With continuous angelic presence, Gabriel would appear to both Christian and Muslim communities, delivering messages that emphasize unity rather than division between these Abrahamic faiths. Shared angelic encounters would reveal the common foundation beneath surface theological differences. When the same divine messengers appear in churches and mosques, delivering consistent messages about God's love and justice, centuries of religious conflict would become impossible to justify or maintain. The Crusades would never occur because angels would appear to both Christian and Muslim armies, declaring that God desires reconciliation between his children rather than holy war. Divine messengers would expose the political and economic motivations behind religious conflicts, revealing how earthly powers manipulate faith for worldly gain. Theological differences between Christianity and Islam would be resolved through direct divine clarification. Angels would explain how both faiths contain authentic revelation, while addressing points of disagreement about Jesus' nature, salvation, and other disputed doctrines through heavenly authority that both traditions would accept. The emergence of a unified Abrahamic faith would transform global religion, with angels confirming the essential unity between Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Barriers between these traditions would dissolve. Religious energy currently spent on interfaith conflict could be redirected towards social justice and spiritual development. However, this unity might come at the cost of theological diversity and depth. The rich traditions of Christian theology, Islamic scholarship, and Jewish wisdom, developed through centuries of careful study and debate. Would unified revelation preserve this intellectual heritage, or create a simplified faith that loses important spiritual insights. Practical challenges would include reconciling different religious practices, legal systems, and cultural traditions that developed within each faith community over centuries of separation. Chapter 13: Eastern Mysticism meets Western Angels. Hindu concepts of devas and Buddhist bodhisattvas would be revealed as different cultural descriptions of the same angelic beings that appear in Judeo-Christian tradition. Angels manifesting in Hindu temples and Buddhist monasteries would bridge the gap between Eastern and Western spirituality, showing universal divine presence across all authentic religious traditions. Similarities between angelic hierarchies and Eastern spiritual cosmology would become apparent through direct experience. The complex pantheon of Hindu deities and Buddhist celestial beings would be understood as cultural interpretations of the same divine messengers who appeared to Abraham, Moses, and Muhammad. Karma and divine judgment would be integrated through angelic testimony about moral law and spiritual consequences. Eastern concepts of reincarnation and Western beliefs about heaven and hell would be clarified through divine revelation about the true nature of soul development and spiritual progression after death. Universal spiritual truths would emerge as angels appear across all major religious traditions, confirming essential teachings about compassion, justice, truth, and love, while addressing cultural and doctrinal differences that developed through human interpretation rather than divine revelation. The integration of meditation practices and contemplative traditions from Eastern religions with Western angelic encounter experiences would create new forms of spiritual discipline and divine communication. Techniques for perceiving and interacting with supernatural beings would be shared across cultural boundaries. Philosophical questions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and divine being would be resolved through direct angelic instruction. The metaphysical speculation that characterizes much Eastern and Western philosophy would be replaced by experiential knowledge gained through ongoing divine-human interaction. However, this integration would also challenge the unique cultural contributions of each religious tradition. The beautiful diversity of human approaches to the divine might be lost in favor of homogenized spiritual understanding that lacks the richness developed through centuries of independent religious development. Chapter 14: The Gnostic Revelations. Early Christian Gnostic texts claimed access to secret divine knowledge hidden from mainstream believers. With continuous angelic presence, these claims would be tested directly as heavenly messengers either confirm or deny Gnostic teachings about the nature of reality, creation, and spiritual enlightenment. Gnostic concepts about multiple levels of divine being and complex spiritual cosmology would be validated or corrected through ongoing angelic instruction. The pleroma, aeons, and demiurge described in Gnostic literature would be explained in terms that resolve centuries of speculation about their true nature and significance. Hidden knowledge about the nature of material creation and its relationship to spiritual reality would be revealed publicly through angelic teaching. Gnostic claims that physical matter is inherently corrupted would be addressed definitively, ending debates about whether creation is fundamentally good or evil. The transformation of Christianity to include validated Gnostic elements would create a more complex and mystical faith tradition. Esoteric spiritual practices and advanced theological concepts, currently limited to scholarly study, would become accessible to ordinary believers through angelic instruction and guidance. secret societies and mystery schools that developed around Gnostic knowledge would be transformed or made obsolete. If angels freely share advanced spiritual understanding, there would be no need for hidden teachings or exclusive access to divine wisdom. Questions about the relationship between knowledge and faith would become practically urgent. Gnostic tradition emphasizes gnosis, direct spiritual knowledge, over pistis, faith or belief. With angels providing direct access to divine knowledge, the role of faith in spiritual development would need complete re-evaluation. The implications for church authority and religious hierarchy would be revolutionary. If angels confirm that advanced spiritual knowledge is available to all believers, rather than being limited to religious professionals, existing ecclesiastical structures would face fundamental challenges to their authority and relevance. Chapter 15: The Dead Sea Scrolls Prophecies. The Qumran community that produced the Dead Sea Scrolls lived in constant expectation of angelic intervention in human affairs. Their detailed descriptions of angelic hierarchies, calendars based on celestial patterns, and preparations for cosmic warfare between good and evil would be validated through continuous heavenly visitation. The War Scrolls prophecies about final battles between the sons of light and sons of darkness would take new meaning with active angelic participation. Instead of being future apocalyptic events, these conflicts would become ongoing spiritual struggles with supernatural allies fighting alongside human communities of faith. Community rules for interacting with divine beings, developed by the Essenes at Qumran, would become practical guidelines for contemporary angelic encounters. Ancient protocols for purification, worship, and communication with heavenly messengers would be implemented in modern religious communities, experiencing regular divine visitation. The teacher of righteousness, the mysterious leader of the Qumran community, would be vindicated through angelic confirmation of his teachings and authority. Questions about whether this figure was the Messiah, a prophetic predecessor, or something else entirely would be resolved through direct divine testimony. Essene practices of communal living, ritual purity, and intensive scripture study would influence mainstream religion as angels confirm the effectiveness of these disciplines for maintaining awareness of divine presence and receiving supernatural guidance. The angelic calendar system described in Qumran texts would be adopted for coordinating divine-human interaction. Instead of following lunar or solar calendars alone, human communities would organize their religious life according to celestial patterns revealed through ongoing angelic instruction. However, the sectarian exclusivity that characterized the Qumran community would be challenged by universal angelic visitation. If divine messengers appear to all humanity rather than only to separated religious communities, the Essene emphasis on withdrawal from corrupt society would need re-evaluation and modification. Chapter 16: Angels in the Digital Age. Angelic encounters in the age of smartphones and social media would create unprecedented global awareness of supernatural phenomena. Divine visitations live-streamed on Instagram and TikTok would reach billions of viewers instantly, making it impossible for authorities to suppress or control information about heavenly messengers. Government censorship of supernatural content would fail as angels appear simultaneously across multiple platforms and locations. Attempts to delete videos of divine encounters would be futile when new angelic appearances occur faster than content can be removed, and witnesses worldwide share their experiences through encrypted networks and decentralized platforms. Angels adapting to digital communication might manifest through technology itself, appearing on screens, speaking through devices, or using internet infrastructure to deliver messages to global audiences simultaneously. Divine messengers could bypass traditional media gatekeepers and speak directly to humanity through the same technologies we use for entertainment and communication. Cryptocurrency and blockchain systems would be revolutionized by divine economic principles. Angels might introduce entirely new concepts of value, wealth distribution, and resource management based on heavenly rather than earthly economics. Traditional financial systems would face disruption from supernaturally guided alternatives that prioritize justice and human flourishing over profit maximization. Artificial intelligence systems would experience unprecedented challenges when encountering genuine supernatural phenomena. Machine learning algorithms designed to identify patterns in natural data would struggle to categorize or predict angelic behavior that operates outside physical laws and logical constraints. The authenticity verification systems developed for digital media would need complete overhaul to distinguish real angelic encounters from increasingly sophisticated deep fakes and CGI productions. Blockchain-based testimony, recording and supernatural encounter verification would become crucial infrastructure for maintaining truth in an era of abundant divine activity. Privacy concerns would take new dimensions as angels demonstrate ability to access all digital information and communication. The balance between divine omniscience and human privacy would require careful navigation in societies dependent on digital technology for work, relationships, and personal expression. Chapter 17: Geopolitical Supernatural Warfare. Nations worldwide would attempt to claim exclusive angelic alliances for political advantage. Countries might assert that their government policies have divine endorsement, while enemy nations operate under demonic influence. International relations would be complicated by competing claims of supernatural backing and divine mandate for national decisions. The United Nations would face requests to incorporate angelic testimony into international law and conflict resolution. Diplomatic protocols would need updating to address situations where heavenly messengers contradict human treaties, challenge national sovereignty, or provide evidence for war crimes, tribunals through supernatural witness testimony. Nuclear warfare would become impossible as angels intervene to prevent global destruction. Divine messengers would disable weapons systems, protect civilian populations, and enforce supernatural disarmament when human conflicts threaten species survival. Military strategy would need complete revision under conditions of angelic oversight and intervention. Democratic processes would be transformed by direct divine input on governance questions. Voters would need to balance human political preferences with angelic guidance about policies that serve justice and human flourishing. The role of elected officials would shift toward implementing heavenly directives rather than representing purely human interests. The emergence of theocratic superpowers with claimed angelic backing would challenge secular governmental systems. Nations that successfully align their policies with divine guidance might experience unprecedented prosperity and protection, creating pressure for worldwide adoption of religiously informed political structures. Intelligence agencies would attempt to spy on divine communications and recruit angelic sources for national security purposes. Counterintelligence operations would need to account for supernatural surveillance capabilities that exceed human technological capacity for information gathering and analysis. However, angels operating according to divine rather than national interests would resist attempts at political manipulation. Heavenly messengers, loyal to universal justice rather than partisan politics, would expose corruption and challenge earthly powers, regardless of their religious rhetoric or claims of divine approval. Chapter 18: Medical Miracles and Scientific Crisis. Hospitals worldwide would experience revolutionary changes as angels provide direct healing alongside traditional medical treatment. Emergency rooms would need protocols for supernatural intervention, and medical staff would require training in how to work with divine healers whose methods exceed current scientific understanding. The pharmaceutical industry would face massive disruption as angelic healing eliminates the need for many medications and treatments. Drug companies would need to pivot towards supporting supernatural healing processes rather than competing with them, potentially leading to entirely new approaches to healthcare and wellness. Medical schools would incorporate angelology courses alongside anatomy and physiology training. Future doctors would need education in both natural and supernatural healing methods, learning to diagnose spiritual as well as physical causes of illness and cooperate with divine healing practitioners. Insurance companies would struggle to adapt their coverage policies to include miraculous healing claims. Actuarial calculations based on statistical health outcomes would become irrelevant when divine intervention can instantly cure terminal diseases and reverse permanent disabilities through supernatural means. Scientific method would require expansion to include supernatural variables in medical research. Clinical trials would need to account for angelic intervention, and new research protocols would be developed for studying healing methods that operate outside natural laws and physical constraints. Ethical questions about the relationship between faith and healing would become practically urgent. Should angelic healing be available to everyone regardless of belief, or does spiritual healing require spiritual preparation? How would medical professionals balance supernatural and natural treatment options for patients with different religious backgrounds? The integration of divine healing with human medical knowledge would accelerate understanding of health, disease, and the connection between spiritual and physical well-being. Medical science would advance rapidly through access to heavenly insights about human physiology and optimal healing practices. Chapter 19: The Question of Worthiness. As we contemplate this alternative history, where angels never stopped visiting humanity, we must ask ourselves the most difficult question of all: are we truly ready for constant divine presence? The psychological impact of living under perpetual heavenly scrutiny would transform human behavior in ways both beautiful and potentially limiting. Consider the weight of knowing that every thought, word, and action occurs under the watchful eyes of divine messengers. While this might eliminate much evil and injustice, would it also stifle the creative rebellion and moral struggle that drives human growth and achievement? Some of humanity's greatest art, literature, and philosophy emerged from wrestling with doubt, uncertainty, and spiritual darkness. Faith itself requires an element of uncertainty to be meaningful. The very word faith implies trust despite incomplete knowledge or evidence. If angels provide constant proof of divine reality, does faith become obsolete? Would humanity lose something essential about spiritual development that comes only through choosing to believe despite doubt and difficulty? Human creativity and innovation often emerge from necessity, struggle, and the drive to overcome limitations. If angels provide perfect guidance and solutions to human problems, would we become spiritually and intellectually lazy? The satisfaction of discovery, achievement, and growth might be diminished if heavenly assistance makes success too easy or predictable. Yet millions of people throughout history have longed for clear divine guidance, unmistakable proof of God's existence, and supernatural assistance with life's challenges. The relief from uncertainty, fear, and moral confusion would bring immense comfort to those who struggle with faith and spiritual questions. Perhaps the ultimate question is not whether we deserve continuous angelic presence, but whether we have the wisdom to maintain our humanity while receiving divine assistance. The balance between heavenly help and human agency would require constant navigation and careful attention to preserving the essential elements of human growth and dignity. Chapter 20. They never left. What if the most shocking truth is that angels never actually stopped visiting humans? What if the silence we perceive is not divine withdrawal, but human blindness? Consider the possibility that heavenly messengers continue their ancient mission, but we have lost the ability to recognize their presence among us. Throughout modern history, unexplained phenomena have puzzled scientists and witnesses alike. Mass bird migrations that change course to avoid disasters before they happen. Strangers who appear at crucial moments to provide life-saving help, then vanish without trace. Technologies that advance at precisely the right time to solve global crises. Medical recoveries that defy all statistical probability and scientific explanation. Airline pilots report mysterious radio communications that guide them safely through dangerous weather when no human controllers are broadcasting. Soldiers describe protective presences during combat that shield them from enemy fire. Emergency responders find victims in impossible-to-locate places after receiving guidance from unknown sources. The rise of artificial intelligence might itself represent angelic adaptation to technological civilization. What if divine messengers learn to work through our digital systems, guiding algorithm development, inspiring breakthrough innovations, and protecting humanity from technological dangers through means we mistake for purely human achievement? Recent global events, pandemics that accelerate medical research, climate crises that inspire environmental innovation, social movements that emerge simultaneously worldwide, might represent coordinated angelic intervention disguised as natural human response to challenges. The patterns suggest supernatural guidance operating through seemingly ordinary events. Children continue to report imaginary friends who provide comfort, guidance, and protection. Adults dismiss these encounters as fantasy, but what if young minds maintain sensitivity to angelic presence that education and socialization train them to ignore? Perhaps we teach our children to stop seeing what was always meant to be visible. The next great spiritual awakening might already be beginning as humans worldwide report increased supernatural encounters, prophetic dreams, and unexplained guidance during times of crisis. The veil between heaven and earth may be thinning, preparing humanity for the revelation that we were never truly alone. The question that will define our future is not whether angels will return, but whether we will remember how to see them when they reveal themselves fully. The age of angelic visitation may not be coming. It may never have ended.